Hey guys, I'm here with David from 4D Performance. I've been spending some time with him over the last few weeks and months, just learning a little bit more about the body and common injuries that we see in the gym and how I might be better able to assist my clients. So I'll just ask a couple of questions and probably just some common things that I get and I see with my clients. So probably first of all, clients who get soft tissue injuries, what would your advice be in terms of can you train with an injury, should you train with an injury, that kind of thing?
We get asked that a lot in clinic, so we work with a lot of amateur and professional athletes and a lot of people who are just training or running amateurly and they want to keep up the activity. So a lot of times people come in and say they saw this person and they told them they had to rest and stop training. These days, most of the research and where we're going with performance is that it's not good to stop. Obviously depending on severity of injury, but for most soft tissue injuries, if it's muscle or tissue related, the therapy for that and the recovery from that is actually going to be some strength-based rehab. So we always encourage people to maintain their training and obviously just modify what they're doing to accommodate for their injury. So if someone's got a shoulder injury and they can't bench press, that's fine. We just take the bench out, we modify and put something else in there. But there's no reason that they need to stop lower body training, cardio, anaerobic training. All of these things, making sure that you're staying fit and strong is going to assist the healing there. If you stop training altogether to rest an injury, your body's going to atrophy, you're going to lose fitness, and it's going to take a lot longer to recover from that injury. So the advice will be to maintain your training, speak to a professional about modifying your session, or speak to a coach about just modifying to accommodate for the injury and incorporating your rehab into that session. So if you're rehabbing, again, a shoulder injury, you might only be doing 3 or 4 exercises. It's not a full session. You can just incorporate those exercises into your program, take out the exercises that would aggravate.
Yep, perfect. What would you say in your experience with people who aren't athletes and aren't really playing sports? Probably people that are more desk-bound. What would you say some of the most common injuries you see are?
The most common injuries in that population are always to do with immobility. So, as a sports-based practitioner and in a performance setting, we're obviously going to always encourage people to be as active as possible. So the typical injury, the typical complaints you get from a corporate and office bounder, generally going to be neck pain, low back pain. But again, when it comes down to it, it's always going to be a problem with not being active enough. There's a thing that went around a few years ago about how they rate sitting as the new smoking. But really, it's not the sitting that is the problem. Sitting is not a bad position. There is no real bad posture or bad position. Everything becomes a bad position if you're in it for too long. So, there's been an influx of people getting sit-stand desks, which I think are really great. But at the same time, people are getting a sit-stand desk and standing for 8 hours and standing and shifting weight to one side, and they're getting injury in their hip or their low back from that. So, the common problems of neck pain and getting those headaches, that is posture related, but it's not necessarily that sitting in this posture is terrible, it's just sitting here and holding this for a long period of time. So, the advice for that, in general terms, being stronger, being fitter is always going to benefit you. But without that, just being in an office setting and making yourself get up and move around as much as possible, it's a very simple advice, everyone knows it, but it's just enforcing that with yourself. So if you do have a sit-stand desk, sit for periods, stand for periods, never for more than say 30 minutes in one position at a time. And it can be as simple as, okay, I'm sitting here, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to do some rotations, do a few stretches and sit back down. At least you're changing your position then.
Yeah, cool. So you would advise as much movement in your day as you can get?
Yeah. If you look at our lives these days, most people working in an office setting are sitting for up to 11, 12 hours a day. That's probably being generous. You sit on a train in the car on the way to work, you sit for 8 hours, you get home, you sit down and watch TV, or you do work at home. So when you compare, and even if you're training, you might be in the gym for max an hour, hour and a half. So that amount of exercise, while it's great, is not enough to combat hours and hours and hours of mobility. So if you can just intersperse your day with movement, it's an accumulated effect. So by the end of the day, if you've got up and walked around the office, you know, the common number of 10,000 steps is not so much about the steps, it's more just about that's how much movement you're creating through your body. So again, it accumulates throughout the day. The more that you can get up and move at the end of the day, you've accumulated movement and you're going to be in a much better position.
Perfect. So a common one as well is like, I find is trying to build stretching and movement into the day. So your recommendation would be little and often, as opposed to a long stretching session. You feel like just frequency of exposure is going to be much better.
Yeah, exactly. Muscle and tissue are designed to move. They're designed to contract and relax. You know, so some people like to get home and stretch for half an hour, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that inherently. But I also don't think that that's enough to just try to lump all of your movement into one session, because you know the lasting effects of static stretching is something like 5 minutes before your tissue returns to its normal length. So getting the muscles active, getting them to go through that contraction relaxation cycle throughout the day is going to be more important than just stretching at the end of the day. You know, something as simple as doing 10 squats onto your chair at work is working multiple muscles. It's a full body exercise. It's putting the tissue under load, which is what it likes to do. So doing that throughout the day, and again, it's the same as the movement, you accumulate load through the tissue. You're going to be much better off doing that than just say sitting down for an hour before a gym session and stretching, because the benefits of that are going to be minimal.
Cool, awesome. Lower back pain, very, very common. Any kind of, obviously without knowing any diagnosis, let's say, any common or general advice for people who maybe suffer sore, tight lower backs, and maybe it's just a common thing that it's just in the background all the time? What do you suggest for that kind of thing?
Again, like you said, low back is a very complex issue, and the diagnosis for low back is very complex. You know, it incorporates a whole bunch of things, not just the physical, but also the psychosocial. You know, these days, a lot of the research is pointing to the fact that because we're chronically stressed, we're overworked, we're overtired, all of these things are going to contribute. It's not just the physical pain. So, as a general rule, without a specific diagnosis, it's a balance thing. So we talk here a lot about the 4 pillars of human performance. Those 4 pillars being mindset, nutrition, recovery, and movement. Obviously, as practitioners, we're focused on movement and recovery, but you need a balance of all of those things. So if you have chronic pain where it's not that specific injury, so I didn't fall over, I didn't lift something and feel my back, it's just constantly sore. Having a good balance of all 4 of those things is going to be your best option. So getting an adequate movement, whether that be through training, walking, getting good recovery. So, you know, if you're sleeping less than 7 hours a night and you have chronic pain, it's never going to go away. And as well as that, making sure that your diet is right. You know, that's a whole rabbit hole, but drinking enough water, eating good foods, that's going to go a long way to reducing inflammatory markers, and just general health and well-being. And mindset is another big one, which is kind of on the cusp at the moment, but that involves a lot of headspace, so a lot of mental health things, your outlook on your pain, how you view your pain. And I guess for us, it always starts with the mindset, so getting that right. And mindset also incorporates things like emotional stress, work stress, but doing a lot of one thing is not going to counteract not doing anything else. So if you're training 6 days a week and you're getting all your exercise and activity, and that's great, but if you're eating poorly and you're not sleeping, it doesn't matter. It's never going to get better. So yeah, I guess it's a bit of a longer answer, but making sure you have that balance from those 4 aspects is really important.
Yes, that's great. Probably great advice just across the board for everyone, really, because I think what we see now is commonly, or things I see a lot of it are high stress, coming from not just physical stress, but stress from job, work-related, family-related, time-related. Probably poor sleep is big. People probably not getting enough sleep, probably not prioritising sleep well enough. Nutrition as well, like adequately giving yourself the right nutrients and enough water, and movement. So if you look at that across the spectrum of a whole day, prioritising your sleep, number one, make sure you get enough sleep time, moving often, eating the right foods, and just making sure that you give yourself some time and look after your own headspace.
100%. Yeah.
Probably good advice for everyone.
Most of that is all stress related, whether it be physical stress, emotional stress, psychological stress. The body responds to stress very similarly. We get an increase in cortisol levels. As soon as that happens, anything inflammatory in the body, it's going to be very hard for your body to clear that. So, like you said, make sure you cover all bases and you should be good to go.
Perfect. Maybe one last one. Runners, I think a lot of people like to run, they want to run. Running is easy to do, it's extremely accessible. We've got things like the City to Serve in Sydney, where people want to participate. However, a lot of people don't necessarily have, probably not maybe in the right position to then necessarily just go and run. What would your advice be to someone who maybe hasn't run for a long time or hasn't run ever really before? What steps would you take before starting fully running? Where would you start first?
You make a very good point about running being something that everybody can do. A point that I come back with that is not everybody can do it well. So running is a skill that most of us don't actually ever learn how to do properly. Running is one of the most common amateur sports in the country. We get over 100 organised events in Sydney alone per year. But the injury rates for running are very high. So a lot of the research indicates that up to 65% of people who start running are going to have some sort of tissue injury in that period of training time. So starting out running, I think an important thing to do is whether or not you go and get an assessment from a professional, but look at the strength first. Running is a unilateral sport. You're always on one leg at a time. So making sure you're balanced strength-wise through the hips, through the legs, through the calves. All of this is super important. Some of the most common injuries being patellofemoral pain, Achilles, and plantar fasciitis. All of these are strength and mechanically related. So, during a jog, the body is going through up to 4 to 6 times body weight coming through these joints. If we're not strong enough, we don't have the muscle tissue to accommodate that, that's going to be a big problem. So the first port of call would be to get yourself into some sort of even basic foundational level strength work a couple of times a week. The second thing is going to be volume. So tendon muscular injuries in running are never normally high force. So it's never going to be, or it can be if you fall or something like that, but typically it's going to be an overuse type injury. And there's a few variables there. One is total volume of training. So, when starting out training running, people don't normally have a program set of how I'm going to increase. If I'm in the gym and I'm bench pressing, I know that I can't go and do a 100 kilo bench press straight away. So I gradually build up. Running is exactly the same. I need to start small. So doing some shorter base runs and spreading them out over the week is better than going, okay, just started running, I'm going to go try and do a 10K. So gradually, incrementally building your volume, and whether that's a 5% increase in kilometers, and then slowly building your speed as well. Everybody starts running and just goes as hard as they can at the start. But it's good to start yourself off, do a little bit of a test run and get your pace time, get your 1 kilometer pace time, find out what your average pace time will be, and then play around with it. So start below that pace time. So if I'm going to run 5 kilometers, and the fastest I can run 5 kilometers in is 6 minute per kilometer pace time, I'm going to train myself just below that and start to build my capacity. So not only are we going to incrementally increase our volume, but also incrementally increase our intensity in terms of how fast we're going. Most injuries occur because we try to go as fast as possible for as long as possible all the time. It's just not feasible. So start with strength, try to address any fundamental strength issues, and then gradually increasing your distance and your time running.
That's really good advice. I think it's common sense really, but I guess none of us really apply it because I think we all assume we can just go and run.
It is exactly right.
Yeah, but like you say, it's a skill.
It's a skill. And the thing is, you can go and run it, and you're going to be fine 9 times out of 10. But it's an accumulated thing. We're compounding load onto our bodies, and if we're not strong enough, or if we're running a bit poorly with our technique a bit off, that compound effect is going to lead to a soft tissue injury at some point. So we can nip that in the bud at the start, and strength in its basic form is always an injury prevention, more so than a purely let's get big and strong.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think, like I was always taught that strength is the mother of all quality.
Yeah,
so it underpins everything.
Yeah.
So I think just having that foundation,
Yeah,
right? Having the foundation to work from.
100%. And it's there's a saying that nobody will ever complain that they're too strong. So you can't be too strong for anything. You might be too bulky or you're too muscular, but you're never going to be too strong. So the stronger you can get yourself, the better off everything else will be.
Perfect.